So we've been looking at our role in communication, what role our interpersonal skills may have in making our communication effective. And in that activity, you've either confirmed what you already knew or been made aware of some other areas. And if there are some new areas, you need to enter them into your PDP. But however aware we are of our interpersonal skills, however good they are, there are still things that are going to impact on our communication. Think about, more than ever now, the choices we have about the way we communicate. But first, there's the form of communication we tend to use. And three commonly recognized ones are written, verbal, and non-verbal. And we've talked about non-verbal already, but verbal includes any face-to-face communication, telephone, presentations, lectures, broadcasts, podcasts. I'm sure you've heard of all those. And massive advantages to that because we're actually there. We can see people's faces a lot of the time, or we can hear the tone of their voice, so we can make judgments on their body language. We can use our voice and our body language to try and make focus on certain areas. But disadvantages can be time and resources, and you need people who are effective at delivering that. We've then got written, which is letters, documents, as listed on the thing there, nowadays intranets, emails. But again, advantages are quick, easy to do, delivery and distribution, because people don't have to be there, do they, for written communication, so we can leave an email for them or something like that. And the disadvantages are sometimes they don't get read because people get overloaded a little bit sometimes with written communication. Plus, they need to be well written, and there needs to be some good written communication in there, otherwise people will just not read it properly and disregard it. But I think we can expand on those and consider things such as visual, pictures, signs, maps, demonstrations. These are all things that normally go with verbal and written sort of content. But for example, a demonstration could stand on its own, a sign could stand on its own as a way of communicating. And they've got advantages because that helps us to bring in other people's learning styles, etc. And then we get electronic, and I know these are written really, but things such as text, instant messaging, Twitter, WhatsApp, all the social media sort of apps are a different sort of form of communication than the normal written. And then finally digital, which used to be for large companies, etc., with video conferencing, but now we've got the facilities such as Skype, FaceTime, WhatsApp video, which make it feasible to use it for anything, communicating with our teams, our staff members, and it's got to be considered as a possible method if it's going to make our communication more effective. And we also need to be considering whether we're using formal or informal communications. So what do we mean by that? Well, formal communications is usually communications in a professional setting, characterized by being planned, with clear direction, predefined channels, no use of slang, that sort of thing. And they usually follow some sort of hierarchical chain, and we'll look at those sort of things in a minute more. But it's normally something that's established within the organisation where employees are bound to follow it as they naturally do within their duties. Examples could be things such as briefings, requests, commands, orders, reports, feedback, etc. Advantages: reliable, very predictable, usually evidenced and controlled with a selected audience, with confidentiality if wanted. And the disadvantages, though, it can be time consuming to organise, it can be inflexible, a lot of people don't engage with it, and it's not able to react spontaneously because it's normally something that's predefined. Whereas when we mean informal, we're talking about not following predefined channels, moving freely in all directions, and therefore it can be quick and adaptable. It's the sort of type of communication that's just really natural communication as people interact in their everyday matters as they go about their day, using whatever colloquialisms and slang is used within that environment. So it could be just casual discussions, sharing of gossip, sharing of feelings and thoughts. Advantages: quick, natural, easy. People engage with it. They can normally do it naturally. They don't struggle with it. And it can react spontaneously to things and quickly. Disadvantages: there's no evidence chain of it. It's hard to contain any sort of confidentiality. It can be hard to control and monitor and know exactly what's going on, the old Chinese whispers type thing. So let's have a look at those in a bit more detail. Formal communication can really be split into four categories. We're talking upwards or bottom up, so that's that flow of information from subordinates up to superiors in authority, reports, updates, briefings, requests. Downward or top down, so where the flow of information goes from superiors to subordinates, briefings, commands, orders, requests, feedback. Then there's horizontal lateral, which is between employees in, say, in different departments working at the same level, so requests, feedback, transfer of information sort of thing. And then there's crosswise or diagonal, which is between employees of different departments, well, anywhere really, a mix of all of that put together. And then with informal, it can happen in a number of ways. We've got single strand, really, when someone just tells someone something and they just tell someone else who passes it on to someone else and the chain continues. We then got clusters where one person tells someone something in a trusted sort of group of people, and they tell all those people, and then someone within that tells some of their trusted friends. So we have clusters of things that develop as it moves out. And then we've just got probability, where someone randomly either overhears something and then passes it on, or someone tells someone something because they think of it as little interest and it's not really important. And then finally, gossip, which is the same as that really, but normally when someone's gossiping, they choose a particular person to tell it to so that they can pass on that information in a certain way because they know that will be passed on to those people, or they know that that person they're passing it on to will exaggerate or take it in a certain way. So probability and gossip are just the difference that one is planned and someone's trying to spread the gossip, and the other one is just something that's happened by probability. So taking all those things into account, we still might need to think about how we're going to communicate based on what is the message we're trying to get across. So we need to make sure that we're choosing something that's appropriate for the topic we're talking about, and that we're encoding the message correctly so that we're getting the best communication form we can, and that it's being the most efficient, and that we're getting it communicated properly and making the most of that opportunity to communicate. I don't know about you, for example, how many times have you received an email that goes into great detail and almost more raises more questions than it answers, and you think, well, if I could have just, this could have been done face to face and I'd have had the chance to ask questions or talk to people, then this would have been great. Now you might go and ask those questions, but some people will just decide to interpret that information and do the best they can with it. And you haven't got a chance either, or the person sending it hasn't got a chance either, to use questioning to check whether that person has understood it. Emails are great for giving simple directions, confirming details of what's been discussed, or to back up a conversation, or giving further information about something that's been discussed. But when you want to delegate a task that's quite complex, they're not the best unless it's been discussed previously. And sometimes in those stages, a face-to-face message, a face-to-face communication, or at least a telephone call, something verbal, will give you much more chance to make sure that that message has got across and that people have had that impact. So we've got some key factors that we need to decide on when we're making our choice about our communication. And they are that, firstly, we need to understand how the different forms of communication differ. We've just looked at some of the different ones. What are the advantages, disadvantages, and which is going to be most appropriate? We then need to think about whether it would be best communicated formally or informally. And that's going to be based on whether we've got a hierarchical process, whether the organisation systems or preferences prefer that. We're going to need to consider confidentiality, the importance of the message, and the audience that we're seeking to reach. Sometimes we may think that that formal method is the best, but sometimes it might not be the best approach. And then we need to and part of that will be understanding the audience that we're communicating to and the message that we're trying to communicate, because it can have a massive different impact. And from them, we might recognise some barriers or potential barriers to using one of those forms. Or finally, it might just be that the organisational culture within the organisation, we may need to consider that, because, for example, we've talked about cultures. If it's a role-based culture, then it may need to come from those individual people's bosses, for them who are in the role, for them to really take it seriously. If we're talking about different parts of the organisation, we may need to use different language, and I don't necessarily mean in a completely different tongue, but we may need to use a different type of language, or we might be trying to, the organisation might be going through a culture of change, so the communication, media, or the method may need to be encouraged in one type of way. We may be using a nudge approach to try and change things, so we may have to think about how we're going to deal with that communication. So quite a lot of things to think about when we're selecting the process of how we're going to communicate. And then, of course, we just need to consider how we go about it. So, we need to think about our approach, our technique, and how we're going to deliver it. And the things we need to consider are the sensitivity and the emotional content of the subject. If it's negative or upsetting in any way, are we going to do it by email? Well, some people do, but I would say that it's probably not going to be effective. Some people do that because they find it hard to deliver that message. How easy is it to communicate the detail? What is the level of knowledge of the other person? Is there any cultural differences? Have we identified any barriers previously? So we're going to look at barriers a little bit more after the next couple of slides. And then what is the receiver's preferences, such as things we talked about when being self-aware? What is their learning style? What is their working style? And then are there any time constraints? And of course, these sometimes can override everything we've done before. But if we've been coming up with clear messages about how we should communicate before, should we really disregard all that information and just do it by email perhaps because we haven't got time to do anything else, even though we've identified that those things could cause problems for it not being an effective communication? So we need to be careful with time constraints. And the final bit we need to consider is the need to ask and answer questions. Clarify understanding. They link in with perhaps 1 and 2 of this, and 3 perhaps. If there's a lot of detail and then we think people are going to ask questions, or if we feel we're going to need to ask questions to check understanding, then that's going to make an impact about how we decide to communicate. Right, so we're going to look at an activity. So quick activity now, because we've been talking about how making the wrong choices can cause misunderstanding or confusion, and we've talked about potential barriers, which we're going to look at in the next part. We want you to watch this quick video, a bit of a comedy classic, and make some notes around anything that you think has caused misunderstanding. So what sort of barriers, why has there been an effect on the communication? Why has it not been effective, and have they had all the problems that they've had? And then I'll see you back at the next session.